Right, Payday projects. This is part 2 of the brake update, brake facelift, whatever you want to call it, on the Triumph T100. I can see things a little bit clearer now. As I say, this is part 2. I think this is just going to be 3 parts. I have got it all sort of straightened out in my head now how it's going to work. So in the last episode we fitted the EBC XC floating disc to the front in stainless steel, and we also put a pair of their double H sintered pads in. We're going to be doing a very similar thing to the rear braking system on the bike. Again, one of their XC stainless steel discs and a set of double H sintered pads. But this is going to be slightly different because we're actually relocating the brake caliper from underneath the swing arm to on top of the swing arm, just behind the shock absorber. Now, it is quite unusual to have a brake caliper underslung like this, and I'm not entirely sure why Triumph did it. I have a feeling it was just a styling exercise, but it does cause a couple of problems. First of all, your caliper is right in the path of all the dirt, grime, salt and water that your bike kicks up, which is never a good thing. And then to make matters worse, it's completely hidden by the left-hand silencer, which means it tends to get ignored when it comes to cleaning the bike. Now, the end result of all of this is a caliper that deteriorates far quicker than it should do, and this bike is testament to that problem. Whereas the front caliper was almost like new, the rear caliper was in nowhere near the same state of preservation. And don't forget, this is a really low mileage bike that spent most of its life sitting in a garage. Now, I'm not exactly sure when it was, but Motone released this relocation bracket quite some time ago. It's a few years old now, and it has become a sort of a necessary benchmark modification. I wouldn't really describe it as an aesthetic upgrade, although Motone have gone all out as they usually do with a CNC machine from aircraft grade aluminium piece that looks about as nice as a piece like this can look, especially anodised in that nice shiny black. But unless you like stripping down and rebuilding your rear caliper on an annual basis, it is a must-have conversion. Now, once again, I've covered rear wheel removal in previous videos, and it's going to make this video far too long-winded if I go through all that again. So if you need assistance with that, either watch the previous video where I show wheel removal, or get yourself a Haynes manual, or do both. One thing that I would advise you to do if you're fitting the Motone relocation bracket is to loosen off the 2 bolts that hold the caliper onto the Triumph bracket prior to rear wheel removal. They will be on pretty tight and you need to be able to brace against something to get the leverage you need to undo them. It's not the end of the world if you forget, there are ways around it, but it does make it much easier. Right, so you've got your wheel off, you've got it on a flat surface, we're ready to change the disc. Now, the rear disc is a little bit easier than the front disc. There are only 4 bolts holding it on, and just like the front, they are the M8 bolts. Take your time with this, you don't want to damage any of the bolts taking them off. They are very tight. Triumph have used bucket loads of Loctite and they stay stiff right until they come out of the thread. Just be patient, work your way around until they're all out. Now, as before, all these threads will need cleaning before going any further and fitting your new disc. So you'll need a reasonable quality tap and die set, clean your bolts and clean the threads out in the hub. Once you've done that with your fingers, just refit all the bolts, make sure that they all work properly and that there's no tight spots. Then you can remove them ready for fitting the disc. Now, it's all fairly straightforward from here. Simply set your disc in place, making sure that it's the right side up. The countersinks to accept the bolts should be facing upwards. Then put a liberal amount of medium strength Loctite on the thread of each bolt and screw them in all the way until the thread stops. Then set your torque wrench to 22 Newton meters and in an opposite star rotation tighten them all down. Now, before refitting your wheel while it's off, it's always a good idea to do any housekeeping, because obviously the majority of the hub is inaccessible once it's fitted to the bike. Remove your spacers and clean out all the old grease. It also gives you the opportunity to check your bearings and make sure they're okay. Then repack with grease and reassemble it. It's literally a 5-minute job that is really worth doing while the wheel's off. When you've finished, just put your wheel to one side because you're not going to be refitting it just yet. And we need to turn our attention to the caliper. Now in this case we're fitting the Hell Performance braided stainless brake hoses. So what I decided to do was drain the rear system completely and remove the caliper from the bike. And we'll be covering the fitting of the brake hoses front and rear, filling and bleeding in the next video. Now I drained it down with my Vitamile hand pump and it took less than 2 minutes to drain the rear brake circuit. Once you've done that, unfasten the union, remove your brake caliper and locate your 2 retaining pins. Now these are basically just pins which are threaded at one end with an Allen head for removal. Unscrew both of them and withdraw them and the pads will just drop out. You can then give your caliper a thorough cleaning and just check it over to make sure everything's okay. In this case I had to clean a little bit of rust off the pins. They weren't too bad, but it was worth doing it while they were off. When you've got it nice and clean, it's time to fit your new pads. Now I'll say this only once. In this case there are no anti-squeal shims. I'm using a very thin smear of copper grease on the back of the pads. If you don't want to, don't. It's entirely up to you. Push your pistons in as far as they will go. They should go almost flush with the face of the caliper. Put your first pad in place, that's the pad that goes directly onto the pistons, and then partially insert both of your pins to hold it in place. Then hook the second pad in place, hold it with your hand and push the pins all the way in so that they're holding both pads securely in place. You can then go ahead and tighten them in with an Allen key. It's now time to put it all back together and fit that Motone rear brake relocation bracket. Now the arm of the bracket has a slot in it which is designed to locate into a welded lug that's on the inside of the swing arm. Slide it in place and then partially insert your axle so that it holds that bracket in place. Now it's not going to hold it securely. If you jiggle things about too much it will fall out. So a second pair of hands just to secure it in place so that it doesn't fall out is a good idea, but it is perfectly doable on your own. Put your wheel in place and carefully align it and then push the axle in. Once the axle's fully in place, that bracket's going nowhere. Put your axle nut back on, ready for torquing up later on, and it's time to put your caliper back on. Now I had a bit of a panic moment here because when I actually put the caliper on it looked to me like there wasn't enough clearance from the shock absorber, and then I realised that I'd had to move the adjusters forward to slacken the chain off to get the wheel off, and in actual fact there was enough clearance. So if that happens to you, that will be the reason for it, don't panic. Slide your caliper over the disc so that it's behind the Motone bracket. Then thread your 2 caliper securing bolts in place and they need tightening to 40 Newton meters. You can then adjust your chain. I made a mental note of where the adjusters were before I started, and once you're happy that you've got everything where it should be, you can tighten your axle nut up to 85 Newton meters. Right, that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching. In the next Payday Projects video we'll be fitting those performance brake hoses, filling them and bleeding them so that the bike is ready to go. I will leave a link for all of these bits and pieces that I've used in the video description down below. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you've found it useful. If you have, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. I will be back on Friday as usual, so until then, ride safely and I'll see you soon.